The Fighting Bradfords were four brothers from the northeast of England who served in the First World War. The four brothers, three of whom were killed, were awarded 2 Victoria Crosses, 1 DSO, 2 Military Crosses and numerous mentions in dispatches, making them the most decorated British family in that war. 3 of them served in the Durham Light Infantry, whilst the final brother served in the Royal Navy and played a heroic role in the raid on the German U-boat docks at Zeebrugge in 1918. This is the story of County Durham's incredible Fighting Bradfords. The brothers hailed from the village of Witton Park, a mining village just north of Bishop Auckland in County Durham, the sons of George and Amy Bradford. Their father, George, was a mining engineer who believed in the strictest of discipline for his boys. Even though they lived a slightly more comfortable life than many of the mining families in the village, they were educated at local grammar schools and none of them went to university. When they did eventually move, he forced his sons to walk 4 miles to school, and the oldest boy was just 8 at the time. That eldest son was Thomas. Born in 1886, Thomas Andrews Bradford was a keen sportsman who went on to captain Durham County Cricket Club before the First World War. On one occasion, he notched up 207 not out in just 90 minutes. It probably comes as no surprise that Sporty Thomas also joined the Army Reserves. In 1904, he was commissioned in the 4th Volunteer Battalion of the Durham Light Infantry, which became the 8th Battalion following the formation of the Territorial Army a few years later. By the outbreak of the First World War, he was commanding D Company of that battalion, and he, along with the rest of the Territorial Army, was immediately called up. Actually, Thomas and 3 battalions of the Durham Territorials were on summer camp in North Wales when hostilities broke out. They immediately broke camp, marched to the local railway station, and boarded a special train, taking them back to the northeast of England for mobilisation. The 8th Battalion were initially assigned to home defences, defending the coastline north of the River Wear. By the new year, they were needed on the Western Front. In April 1915, they marched through cheering crowds in Newcastle city centre before boarding a train for Europe. By the following morning, they were disembarking at Boulogne. They went straight into action at the Second Battle of Ypres, which started on the 22nd of April. In the space of 24 hours, 180 of the 200 men in Thomas Bradford's company had been killed, wounded or posted missing. During his wartime service, Thomas Bradford was wounded, mentioned in dispatches twice, and awarded the Distinguished Service Order, the DSO. He was later transferred to command a training battalion in Ireland, before finishing the war as a colonel in the York and Lancaster Regiment. He was the only one of the 4 brothers to survive the war. The next oldest of the Bradford brothers was George, who was born on St George's Day, 23rd of April 1887, a year after his brother. In 1904, the same year that his older brother enlisted in the Volunteers, George joined the Royal Navy as a midshipman on HMS Exmouth. In 1909, while serving as a first lieutenant on HMS Chelmar, he displayed the sort of courage that would eventually see him being awarded Britain's highest medal for valour. In the early hours of Wednesday the 3rd of March, HMS Chelmar, a river-class destroyer, was sailing with HMS Doon from Portsmouth en route to Dover to escort the King, Edward VII, to France. Suddenly in the dark night, HMS Doon rammed a trawler out of Lowestoft called the Halcyon. Both naval ships turned on their searchlights, and George Bradford was placed in command of a whaler, or lifeboat, to pick up survivors from the sinking trawler. As he approached the Halcyon, his own ship, HMS Chelmar's searchlight failed, so he was forced to conduct the evacuation with only partial illumination that night. Rescuing 3 men, he returned to his destroyer where his boat was about to be hauled aboard, when he was informed that a boy was still trapped on the sinking trawler. He insisted on going back to the trawler and leapt on board and went inside. And as the trawler gave a violent lurch, George Bradford appeared on the deck holding an unconscious boy. Jumping into the black water, he kicked out towards the lifeboat, and as he did so, the trawler upended and slowly sank beneath the surface. At the outset of the First World War, he was a lieutenant on HMS Orion, a dreadnought-class battleship, and he participated, briefly, in the Battle of Jutland in 1916. Thereafter, HMS Orion spent the war on routine patrols, and Bradford was promoted to lieutenant commander, before transferring to HMS Hindustan in February 1918. That posting didn't last long. Just 2 months later, he volunteered to join a storming party during the Zeebrugge Raid. The port of Zeebrugge in German-occupied Belgium was home to a U-boat base. The U-boats were proving a danger to Allied shipping in the English Channel, and there had been several previous attempts to put the port out of action. On the 23rd of April 1918, St George's Day, yet another daring raid was attempted. The objective was to scuttle 3 ageing warships in the harbour, where the Bruges Canal entered the North Sea, thus blocking the port to German submarines. To enable those ships to manoeuvre into position, the cruiser HMS Vindictive and storming parties of sailors and Royal Marines on board 2 requisitioned Mersey ferries, the Daffodil and the Iris II, would land on the 1-mile-long mole that protected the harbour. Against the heavily fortified German defences, this attack would be almost a naval version of a forlorn hope. In other words, the men were participating in something akin to a suicide attack. Due to those odds stacked against the storming parties, it was decided to ask for volunteers, with those without wives or children going to the front of the list. George Bradford was one of those volunteers. As George on HMS Iris II, along with the other former Mersey ferry and the cruiser, approached the mole, the wind blew their smokescreen away, and the Germans opened fire. If that heavy enemy fire wasn't enough, the sea was getting rough, with waves crashing against the mole, making a landing almost impossible. HMS Iris couldn't even get close enough to the mole wall for lines to be thrown ashore. In desperation, George Bradford climbed to the top of an onboard crane and then jumped onto the harbour wall, securing an anchor hold with a grappling hook so that his men could follow. As he stood on the mole urging his men across, George Bradford was riddled with enemy machine gun bullets and fell dead off the wall into the sea. For his brave action, he was awarded Britain's highest medal for valour, the Victoria Cross. His citation read, "His action was one of absolute self-sacrifice. Without a moment's hesitation, he went to certain death, recognising that in such action lay the only possible chance of securing Iris II and enabling her storming party to land." He was one of nearly 200 men from the storming parties killed in the operation. A further 300 were wounded. 500 casualties from a force of 1,700. As it was, 2 of the warships were sunk in the harbour. However, they were sunk in the wrong positions, and the Germans were able to sail past them at high tide. So, whilst it slowed U-boat operations, it didn't stop them. In fact, it was the threat of anti-submarine patrols in the English Channel that would ultimately force the Germans to move most of their U-boat fleet back from Zeebrugge to Germany in late summer. James Barker Bradford was born on the 11th of December 1889. The quietest of the brothers, he was, like them, a keen sportsman. Educated at Darlington Grammar School, when he completed his education, he became an engineer, and by 1914 was a director of a wire and steel works in his native County Durham. Just like older brother Thomas, he also joined the reserves, although in his case he joined the Naval Reserve, serving as an able seaman. In 1913 he transferred to the Territorial Army, joining a cavalry regiment, the Northumberland Hussars, once more as an ordinary trooper. When the war broke out, he was mobilised and sent to the Western Front, and seemed content to be a ranker. However, his younger brother, Roland, who we're going to hear about in a few minutes' time, convinced him that his talents and his leadership skills would be more valuable as an officer. So consequently, in 1915, he was commissioned in the 18th Battalion of the Durham Light Infantry, one of Kitchener's volunteer battalions. On the 1st of August 1916, he was hospitalised with gunshot wounds to the arm and right ankle during the Battle of the Somme, Whilst back home, recuperating, he married Annie Wall. Recovered from his injuries, the newly married James Bradford headed back to the Western Front. In March 1917, he was awarded the Military Cross for leading his men into enemy trenches, personally killing 3 Germans, capturing others, and taking possession of 2 machine gun posts. Just 2 months later, he was once more hit by bullets, this time in his left shoulder and left thigh. Evacuated to a casualty clearing station near Arras, he died of his wounds 3 days later, on the 14th of May, 1917. Second Lieutenant James Barker Bradford MC was buried at the Dusson British Military Cemetery in northern France. He was 27 years old. The youngest of the 4 brothers was Roland Boys Bradford. Born on the 23rd of February 1892, he joined the army when he left school in 1912. Commissioned in the 2nd Battalion, Durham Light Infantry, he was on the Western Front just a month after Britain had declared war on Germany in 1914. Within a month of that, he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. Mentioned in dispatches in January 1915, he was awarded the Military Cross a matter of weeks later. Like his brother James, he too fought at the Battle of the Somme as a captain in the 9th Battalion of the Durham Light Infantry. On the 24th of November 1916, he commanded the 9th Battalion in an assault on the German lines. As the attack faltered, he took over command of a battalion alongside them, leading both battalions forward to capture their objective and thereby securing the flank of the British attack. He was just 24 years old. For that action, he too was to receive the Victoria Cross. Roland and George Bradford were the only brothers to be awarded Britain's highest medal for valour in the First World War. In fact, there have only ever been 4 pairs of brothers to have been awarded the VC. For the record, the others are the Goths in the 1850s, who I've covered in a previous episode, the Sartorius brothers in the 1870s, and Alexander Turner and Victor Turner, who were awarded theirs in the First and the Second World Wars respectively. Popular with his men, Roland formed a battalion band, plus a football team, a concert party, and even a Shakespeare reading society to keep up morale. Mentioned in dispatches for the 3rd time in January 1917, later that month he was also promoted to the temporary rank of Lieutenant Colonel. One day after his face had been lacerated by splinters from an exploding steel helmet, he was promoted to Brigadier General. At the age of 25, he was the youngest Brigadier General in the history of the British Army. Inside the month, he was to lead the 186th Brigade in the Battle of Cambrai, the first great tank battle in history, which started on the 20th of November 1917. 10 days into the battle, Bradford left his forward command post for a rest behind the lines. As he made his way back, a shell landed nearby. Brigadier General Roland Boys Bradford VC was hit by shrapnel in his spine and died almost immediately. What an incredibly sad end to such a talented young man. And let's just pause for a moment to remember that he was both a Brigadier General and a Victoria Cross recipient at just 25 years of age. As his commanding officer wrote, he was a very exceptional man, although only a boy. He was buried at the Hermes British Military Cemetery in the Pas-de-Calais, France. The only brother to survive the war was, ironically, the oldest, Thomas Bradford DSO. Demobbed, he became a director of a local coal mining company and lived his entire life in County Durham. He was knighted in 1939 for public service, including serving as Treasurer of Durham University and also both being High Sheriff and Deputy Lord Lieutenant of the county. He died in 1966, aged 80, nearly 50 years after his 3 brothers. The painful loss of 3 out of 4 brothers was not unique for British families in the First World War. But what does make the Bradford brothers stand out is the medals for bravery that they received. 2 Victoria Crosses, the only brothers to achieve that in World War I. A DSO, 2 military crosses, and numerous mentions in dispatches. The Fighting Bradfords were the most decorated British family in the First World War. What an incredible family they were, and what an incredible sacrifice they made for their country. The Fighting Bradford brothers, lest we forget. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story, and also hope that you, like me, think that more people should be aware of those brave young men. Now, don't forget my live show, which is every Friday at 1 PM UK time. Loads more stories coming your way. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.